Help support our coverage using Blueberry, the community that gives creators the ability to make money, get detailed audience measurements, and host their audio and video. Get 30 days to try out the service using promo code Blueberry004. That's BLUBRRY004.
Ooh.
Okay, so we've got Chris Chinnock. Is that the correct way to pronounce it?
Chinnock, yeah, that's how I pronounce it. Yeah.
All right, and you're with the 8K Association.
I am.
So it wasn't too many years ago where it was just everything was 4K, but now everything is 8K.
That's so last century, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny is we live stream, and I was laughing at one of the guys earlier today because I normally stream in 720. He was streaming in 1080, and just because the internet 8K or 4K depends on bandwidth limitations. You know, it doesn't work out so well. But in TV, it's a whole different game. It's a whole different play.
Yeah.
So what's happening with the 8K Association?
Well, it's certainly early in the 8K transition, but we've seen a number of transitions in the TV market and displays in general. You know, we've gone from standard definition to high definition to full HD to 4K. We've added HDR as part of that transition.
Yeah.
So 8K is just kind of the next natural step, right?
Yeah, and I've heard some actors are already scared of 8K because they can really see the lines on their faces and stuff.
You know, when 4K first came out, I remember just as a video engineer, everybody asking for 4K at their wedding and things like that. And I would have to kindly explain, like, we have to hope that you don't have any loose threads. We need to make sure that you have an actual makeup person for 4K so that you don't have a hard line of makeup down your chin and all your wedding video.
Exactly. All the sets had to be redesigned.
Totally redone.
Yep.
Yeah. So is that the same thing people are facing with 8K just because we're really doubling again, right?
Yeah. It's true. Yeah, there are some accommodations that you're going to have to make. But certainly content creators understand the benefits. If you capture at higher and higher resolution, there's just more you can do with that image. You can always create something softer.
That's right.
Sure.
You can always do something lower resolution.
Yep.
But if you start with a higher resolution master, it's going to be a better product no matter what resolution you master at.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've always said, even like here, it's like in audio. We can always fix low audio, but we can't fix overdriven audio.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with like the 8K analogy. You get a better initial product. You can always downsize if you need to, but that initial product is your master. You can master from that.
Right.
But there is a flip side to that, because you can a lot of the 8K TVs now do very sophisticated upscaling. You can take 4K content, you can take full HD content, and you create those pixels.
Yep.
And the algorithms that they use now are actually quite a bit different than we had in previous generations, right? That was more kind of scaling and nearest neighbor kinds of things. Now they're all AI based. So they're looking at textures, they're doing machine learning on databases and identifying objects and adding textures and details that is just not algorithmically based.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there's I know Blackmagic and Aja both have a unit out. I think Blackmagic has a Teranex that'll do SD to 4K.
Yep.
Pixel for pixel, line for line in
It'll
real time.
It'll do it to 8K now too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was the recent update that I just saw come through on my blog posts.
Yep.
From their RSS feed was that they'd updated to 8K, and it's really interesting to see this move in my industry, because I work in the live events industry, and to see everything moving toward the direction of 4K, even in projection.
Yeah.
All of that has been amazing, and the things that can be done with those resolutions as far as video blending, pixel for pixel video blending, are really, really remarkable.
And the higher resolution also makes visual effects work much easier too, right? Cleaner edges, better plates, more pixels for the definition.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It really, really is. Now, I'm going to ask a hypothetical question. Is 8K the limit?
We're certainly getting toward diminishing returns at this point, yeah. I would not be surprised to see 16K come, but you may see maybe a de-emphasis on resolution kind of going forward. And the reason I say that is because there are other technologies that are coming down the pike. For example, think of light field displays. You know what light field displays are, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you need tons and tons of pixels for that. I mean, orders of magnitude more.
Yeah.
So we're gonna, 8K and 16K is almost a starting point for those kinds of displays, right?
Yeah, precisely. When you're starting to get into live XR, that kind of resolution, those kind of things, you've got to start up at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and we're seeing the early beginnings of those kinds of displays, and we're seeing some out on the show floor here, right? Yep. There are 8K based 3D displays that are looking pretty good.
Yep.
And as you add more pixels, you'll be able to add more views, more directionality, more fidelity, and 3D is come and gone several times. We know this.
Yeah.
As did 4-chip.
Yep.
4-chip came. I was very excited to hear about the 4-chip revolution, and let's get a yellow color chip in there and add a whole another 2 million colors to our palette.
Yes.
But it, once again, like Todd asked, at what point do you go, okay, we're getting a little bit wild here?
Yeah.
We're getting a little bit crazy.
Yeah. I think really it's kind of driven on two sides of the picture here, right? It's the device makers who are always looking to add new technology. They have to push the new frontier. They got to have something new to add to sell something new, right?
Yeah.
And that it's just not TV makers. It's electronics and processing and all that stuff.
Yep.
And then it's the creatives. You start to give them new tools, new color palettes, new higher dynamic range, new frame rates that they can do, variable frame rates.
Right.
And these become new tools, and they say, well, I want to create content in different ways. VR, I mean, right? So these are, creatives will drive it on one end, and the device makers will drive it on the other end. The challenge is in the middle.
Yeah.
How do you move from one to the other?
Well, and how do you make it consumable?
Yeah.
It's great if you've got it in this limited market and it's going from the people making the movies to a movie screen. What about everybody at home? What about the post market?
Right, exactly.
And with that in mind, I guess one of the questions I'd ask is for all those folks out there that are still living in 1080p world, perfectly fine.
Yep.
Your eyes process it just fine. How can they fix the issue of 4K and 8K brightness? Because a lot of people that I know are like, my God, everything's just so bright now. And I'm like, well, the issue is the studio at the news station is shooting on 4K cameras and pushing it out that way, and you're watching it on a lower resolution. That doesn't get rid of the gamut of that extra bandwidth of colors that comes through from 4K or 8K.
Right.
So how long will it be before they're going to be able to fix that?
Well, I mean, the TVs are getting pretty smart about how they identify the signals, right? It can be a standard dynamic range signal. It can be an HDR, a high dynamic range signal. So people who are still on 1080 displays are almost always looking at standard dynamic range content. So they don't really have to deal with the HDR problems. It's when you get, I think, HDR content on an HDR display that people go, whoa, this is bright, or I can see all those great details in the shadows and stuff. Some people love it. I think most people love it.
Quite a few do. We have the issue, though, where there are some 1080p video mixers where that color white just maxes out the chip, and eventually you deal with the black frame, and it comes back until that buffer is rebuilt. And if somebody's sitting on a white slide with a whole bunch of tiny black print, that could be flashing like every 15 seconds while they're on stage.
Oh, I see.
It's just because things have progressed that fast in the industry
Yep.
that, not everybody's out there using a 4K projector
True.
or a 4K mixer, but the computer that's projecting, even if we dumb it down to 1080, is still pushing all the colors of 4K, even out of a 1080 output.
Yeah.
So interesting things like that are starting to occur now in the live field because of that.
And it's a situation too, and I come from a different perspective. Where I live now is literally rural America, internet hell. I mean, there is not good bandwidth, and I'm waiting for Elon to get me a satellite above my head so I can, get Starlink. But the challenge I have is I got this beautiful 4K Sony TV, spent a lot of money for it, and unless I'm plugging a some sort of external media into it, I'm not getting the 4K, even any of the 4K, just because I don't have the bandwidth resolution to pull it in, and I'm not subscribed any longer to a satellite or cable TV.
Yep.
So
and fixed media, I mean, that's dying, right?
Yeah.
Right. So for me, and for a subset of people that live in the United States where they don't have a good internet connection, there can be all kinds of great 4K content out there and just not capable.
Yeah.
They dumb it down. They take it to 1080 or if it's even starting to buffering, they'll even go lower with the delivery rate like Netflix and so forth. And not everything in Netflix is obviously 4K, but so we got to get the broadband issue fixed for some of us to be able to support the higher transfer rates that are needed for those higher resolutions.
Build Back Better is supposed to put some money in this area, right?
Knock on wood. We'll see.
Well, and granted, there are a few aftermarket solutions for that. The Decimator that I showed you the other day.
But John C. Consumer is not going to buy a Decimator.
No. They don't even know that a Decimator.
What is a Decimator?
See, he's in the 8K Association. A Decimator is an upscale, downscale, or HDMI to SDI conversion.
Okay.
So right now I have a lower quality 1080p screen that only does 29.97. My output is doing 59.94, and the Decimator is kicking it out what the monitor needs to see and kicking it out what the record needs to see.
But you're the pro AV guy, so.
But for a few $100s, you can get a 1080p to 4K.
I know, but for J consumer though,
tough.
and if they're on a good bandwidth connection,
it's the cost of a television.
Yeah, or if they have a cable connection, they're starting to get access to some of this higher resolution content.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a matter of time, and it's just like now, how many 8K sets are out? That's another thing too, right?
Yeah, it's still early days.
It's still early days. But, within 5, 6, 7 years, I'm sure we're all going to have an 8K in our home.
Well, I mean, it happened with 1080p
Same thing.
And 4K, right?
Same thing.
It took over rapidly.
Did you know there's actually a pretty a clear cycle between standard def and 720, and then 720 to 1080 and 1080 to 4K, 7 years.
7 years.
From introduction to 50% of sales.
Yeah.
See, I said 5 to 6 years, and he just confirmed it, 7 years.
Yep.
Close to it.
Now, it's going to stretch out with 8K because we kind of had for two things. We kind of had, when 4K started, you might think, well, that starts a 7-year cycle, right? Well, it did sort of, but kind of halfway or partway through that, we had the introduction of 4K HDR. Which was a much more significant introduction. So that almost restarted the cycle, I think, when we started there. And then the pandemic.
And then also, too, is you've had production houses invest millions of dollars in 4K cameras.
Yes.
So now you're asking them relatively in a short period of time, let's go bump to 8K.
Sure.
So, you're looking at a complete recapitalization of gear. So what they're going to do is they're still running 1080 and 4K recording gear, and as that stuff starts to retire,
they're already talking about 12K.
Yeah,
like there's
Blackmagic's got one.
Blackmagic has 12K capability already.
Yep.
So
I remember the first Red.
Yeah. And that was not that long ago. When you
no,
think about it,
not that
long. AV equipment-wise, that was like a decade ago.
Yeah.
That was baby steps.
Saw that Red 4K camera, 4K.
Exactly.
So,
what will it take for this adoption to come about? Because of course, like you were saying,
I think time, right?
But
well, it's time for sure, but and that's part of the mission of the 8K Association is trying to figure out how we can kind of move this time frame a little bit faster, right?
Well, and yes, the example I always give people when it comes to products, especially in the AV market, is my beloved Minidisc. I love Minidisc. It was a great format for creators. You could record, you could mix things around. I could put 5 or 6 different mix downs of a song and go, I like that one, but I want it to be track 3, and I could do it in my car. It was wicked cool. The problem was not everybody even had a CD player yet.
Yeah.
We hadn't even made CDs mandatory in computers yet. And Sony was already trying to say, here's the best new format.
Yeah.
And it crashed the entire mini disc market, which was really looking to be something very revolutionary. And of course, quickly
It sounds like you're living in the VHS days now.
Hey man, I just got a rack down analog 4-track to bring all my stuff down to digital, all right? But the thing is, once again, like I said, yes, you want to push that timeline forward, but are you afraid of scaring the consumer? Like the same way where it's like, hey, I haven't even made a 4K TV jump yet.
Yeah.
You're talking about 8K?
Well, maybe. I don't know about scaring the consumer. I think it's just going to be, the way the 4K TVs got out there, right? They started, they were expensive, they were big screen sizes, they moved down in screen size and in price.
Same thing.
It's just going to happen again. And, in 5 years, you're going to go to the store and you can't, you'll get a 4K, but it's, it'll be 34 inches.
That's right.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and just by default, you go in the store and there's going to be a whole wall of 8Ks.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just by default. Now there's one or two, but later on there's going to be 30 of them that you're going to be able to pick from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's pretty amazing, and I'm thinking about all the cameras I have. I haven't made the jump even to 4K because I don't need it, because you do online stuff. I don't need to do it.
I've got a 2.5. I've got a 2.5 camera.
So, at some point I'll have to make the gulp and say, okay, I got to go ahead again, recapitalize and go to 4K.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
So-
what kind of technologies are going to be necessary to leverage this in consumer products like televisions, stuff like that? Because,
Well-
of course, OLED, plasma, that kind of stuff is what made 4K possible.
Yeah. Well, all those technologies support 8K as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
just
Oh, yeah.
higher densities, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just higher pixel density.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, if you look at some of I remember being here at CES maybe, I don't know, how many years ago when we saw the first OLED displays. And when I saw those displays, and it was shocking to me how brilliant and how much almost more real than life those images look. And to think where we were, maybe that was 10 years ago. I don't even remember the timeline. But to see now, like when I walked through a couple of the major manufacturer booths with some 8K TVs, I'm like, oh, I had the same reaction.
Yeah.
So
Stunning.
once people see, now that's obviously in a demo reel, it's in perfect conditions, lighting, but once people see that, they're going to go, oh, the consumer's going to make the jump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The consumers, once they see it, and they're like, oh my God, I have to have that. I need a 70-inch in my living room, or
Sure.
an 80.
Yeah.
And
there's a new display technology that just debuted at CES this week. It's called QD display.
oh yep.
I was one of only 5 media who saw it at
Wow.
this show.
Wow.
Really? So what was your reaction?
I loved it. So it's
So they had it hid. They didn't have it out for
no, it
public.
was in a private suite.
Explain it a
Wow.
little bit if you can.
Sure. So an OLED TV has organic layers, right?
Yeah.
What LG does is they create basically a white OLED emitter. So it's white light, and then they put red, green, and blue color filters, and actually a clear, so it's a white subpixel as well on top of that. So it has great contrast, great colors, etc. You've seen what OLEDs look like.
Yep.
The challenge, or perhaps the minor deficiency of that, is it can't get super bright in those colors. If you want a very bright red, green, or blue image, or a yellow image,
Yeah.
it just can't do it.
Because it's layered.
Because it's layered, and you just can't push the materials that hard, right? So that's why they have that white subpixel. You add a little bit of white, and it makes it brighter,
Sure.
but you desaturate the color by doing that.
Yeah.
So and the way of measuring
Wash
that's
it.
called color volume. Okay, how bright can the colors get over a luminance range? Okay, so what the QD display does is it starts with an OLED blue only layer. It has a kind of a clear subpixel again, so that's the same blue that's coming through in a traditional OLED layer. But now for red and green, they use quantum dots. So the blue converts those quantum dot materials to red and green with very narrow bandwidth. So it's direct emitting a blue OLED and red and green quantum dots.
Wow.
It's amazing how you can trick the eyeball, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the advantage, now it has all the advantages of wide color gamut, but now it's bigger color volume.
Yep.
So you can get brighter whites, brighter reds, brighter greens.
Deeper contrast.
Deeper contrast. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Did you
Really
you
cool.
have a moment?
Well, maybe I'm a little too jaded. I don't know. I do this all day long, you know.
Yeah. You know, I think we all know it when we see it. When we go, wow! I think we all know it.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it's going to ultimately. I think, Chris, on the 8K side, for the consumer, when they see it and they say, "Wow," that will be the changing point.
Yeah.
And again, smaller, less cost. Get it down there where 4Ks are now.
Sure.
And then it's
Which took a hot minute to do.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
But now you can go out and buy 4K monitors
Yeah.
and things like that are less than a half-inch thick for a couple $100.
I know.
You know?
So it's crazy. Well, sir, we've kept you long. We thank you for coming out.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Incredible conversation.
Is 8kassociation.co.com?
.com, yep.
.com.
You betcha. Yeah, we're trying to educate the whole ecosystem from content creation, distribution, consumers. So, yeah, we got a whole bunch of stuff there to help people understand what's going on and how they can get engaged.
Incredible.
And tell the actors out there, make sure you keep your plastic surgery current because you're going to need it when 8K comes.
You're gonna need your own special makeup person.
There you go. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
Hey, thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of CES.
So,
TPN CES 2022 coverage is executive produced by Michelle Mendez. Technical directors are Kurt Corliss and Adam Barker. Associate producers are Nancy Ertz and Maurice McCoy. Interviews are edited by Joe Minnie. Hosts are Marlo Anderson, Todd Cochran, Scott Ertz, Christopher Jordan, Danielle Mendez, and Alante Sparks. Las Vegas studio provided by HC Productions. Remote studio provided by PLUGHITZ Productions. This has been a Tech Podcast Network production. Copyright 2022.